Hello guys, I am happy to welcome you back. If you are enjoying my stories, please hit the like button and subscribe button. It helps YouTube algorithm to notices me. Now sit back and enjoy the story. It was supposed to be one last camping trip before winter. Just me, my best friend Nate, and our girlfriends Jenna and Emily. We grew up in Western Pennsylvania, where woods were playgrounds and camping trips were weekend rituals. And this was supposed to be like old times. No phones, no schedules, just a couple days in the Allegheny National Forest before everything froze over. The trailhead was more remote than I expected, with dirt roads turning to rocky tracks, and after 40 minutes without seeing another car, we knew we were properly off-grid. No service, no towns, just 2 tents, a cooler, and a campfire waiting for us. That first night was perfect, crisp air, beer cold from the cooler, burgers cooked over the flames, and the sky so clear we could see every star, laughing, trading old stories, and letting the crackling fire fill the silence while the woods were alive around us. Rustling leaves, distant owl calls, the comforting soundtrack of being truly outside. Saturday morning, we packed day gear and set off for a long hike, a loop Nate had found online. And the first few miles were textbook autumn beauty. Golden leaves, soft ground, sunlight filtering through the branches in perfect beams, but the trail narrowed and blurred the further we went, less of a path and more of a memory of one. By the 3rd mile, things felt different. The woods were too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring because they're desperate for any sound at all. And the trees leaned closer, branches low and knotted, blocking out the sky, making it feel like we were being funneled. That's when we found the carvings, at first just a single spiral gouged deep into a tree trunk, sap still bleeding from the wound. "Trail marker?" Jenna asked, trying to sound casual, but no one answered. And soon, the spirals were everywhere. Some carved deep, others scratched so lightly they were almost invisible. Except I saw them, over and over again. We reached a clearing, too circular to be natural, with trees arched overhead, their branches weaving together like fingers gripping each other tight. And in the center stood a wooden post, weathered, worn, but still standing, with long, uneven gouges slashed deep into it. "Creepy as hell," Nate muttered, and we didn't stay long. The trail after the clearing was different, like it was leading us somewhere not out of somewhere, and the ground felt hollow, the silence pressing down like a weight on my chest, with spirals multiplying. On rocks, on tree roots, even on fallen logs. A language we couldn't read, or maybe weren't meant to. The first time I saw the figure, I thought it was just shadows. Tall, thin, standing perfectly still between 2 trees, too far to make out details but close enough to feel wrong. And every time I blinked, it was gone. But I knew it was there, watching, following, and I didn't say anything, and neither did anyone else, but we all knew. By the time we decided to head back, the trail was gone. No markers, no footprints, nothing but trees and spirals carved deeper and fresher the further we went, and the woods weren't just watching anymore, they were waiting. Emily tripped on a root and twisted her ankle so badly she couldn't walk, her ankle swelling purple while Jenna tried to hide her panic, but we all saw it. We couldn't hike out like this, not at the pace we needed. "We'll camp here," Nate said, trying to sound in control. "Just for tonight." And no one argued because we didn't have a choice. We set up camp in silence, the fire flickering small and weak against the overwhelming dark, the trees standing too close, their bark covered in more spirals than I could count. They didn't even look carved anymore. They looked grown, like the wood itself was curling into shapes it shouldn't. The first scream came just after midnight, starting high and animal-like before stretching, warping into something that could have been human if it wasn't so wrong, ending abruptly and leaving only silence thick enough to choke on, and none of us moved or slept. At some point, Nate whispered, "Do you see it?" And I did, just past the light of the fire, standing perfectly still between two trees, the figure too tall, too thin, its head cocked at an unnatural angle, its arms hanging wrong, too long, fingers brushing the ground, its face a pale smear, impossible to focus on, like it wasn't meant to be seen. It didn't move, but it didn't need to. The spirals were on our tents when we woke, scratched into the nylon and drawn into the dirt around the fire, and no one slept. Emily's ankle was worse, every step agony, but we had to move. Staying wasn't an option, and the figure followed us, always just out of focus, always there. We walked for hours, but the forest never ended, and the spirals followed us too, carved into trees we hadn't passed, etched into rocks that shouldn't be there, sometimes high in the branches, too far for anyone to reach. The figure was always behind us, and though we tried not to look, some instinct, some ancient primal thing buried deep in our bones, wouldn't let us forget it was there, its head tilted too far, its hands dragging in the leaves, its pale blur of a face impossible to fully see. The forest was changing, the trees no longer growing naturally, bending and twisting toward us like they were leaning in to listen. The ground thin and hollow beneath our feet, like we were walking on a skin stretched over something much deeper. We found a cabin, half collapsed and covered in moss, its door hanging open, and inside the walls were covered in spirals, some carved, some drawn in what looked like ash or old blood, with a circular hole in the center of the floor, too perfect, and when I shone my flashlight down, there was no bottom. We left the cabin, but the forest didn't let us go, and the spirals were inside our minds now, flashing behind our eyes every time we blinked. And when we finally reached the cars, we didn't speak, driving away in silence, but I felt the spirals with me. I still see them. On my bedroom ceiling, scratched into my front door, on my bathroom mirror traced in condensation after a shower. And last night, I saw the figure again, standing across the street, too tall, head bent, hands dragging on the ground. It's still following me. The spiral opens the door, and I think I left it open.